Hey guys, this is David from Keiryu Rod Co. Thanks for watching, and today we're going to talk about nymphing rigs for our Keiryu rods and a Euro style nymphing rig. Now there's a lot of different ways to nymph with the Keiryu rod. The Keiryu rod is really optimized for nymphing because of the strong backbones that these rods have, and they're very flexible fast action tips that these rods have. They make them great for setting the hook in deeper water with nymphs. Now, there's a variety of ways that you can set up a nymphing rig. Any floating line, for example, this is the Daiwa floating line that we have, or this one right here, our Kevlar furled line. Any of these type of floating lines, you can add a nymph to this line on 3 to 4 feet of tippet, typically fluorocarbon tippet, and you can be very successful. Depending on the size of the nymph that you're using, you can use an indicator such as a thingamabobber like this, or one of these foam ones, which I find work very well. In fact, I've had fish try to bite these, so that tells me that they're actually pretty good and they're not spooking the fish. Now, it's always better, if you are going to use an indicator, to go as small as you can. If you can go to a smaller size, that would be better. Or I also believe the see-through ones are less likely to spook the fish. That's just my personal belief. And again, if you can fish without an indicator, that's even better, because indicators will always add some drag to your presentation. Now, with all that said, one of my favorite nymphing rigs is what I term a Euro style rig. Now obviously Keiryu is not Western gear, but I use that term because in all practical terms, conceptually speaking, we're trying to do the same thing, and that is we're trying to have a tight connection between you and the nymph. This is a non-interrupted, to the extent possible, connection that you will have. So in the case of Keiryu, what that means is having a very thin line that goes from your Lillian down to the nymph, or nymphs in our case, since we're going to have 2 nymphs in this rig. Now, this isn't the only way that I nymph with Keiryu. Let me just say that. It's probably my favorite way. It's great for hitting fast runs and pocket water. But depending on the river, if you're talking a pretty large river with pretty fast current and a bottom that is not very rocky, then the Utah rig is an excellent option. So it really depends, but I find that this rig more often than not is kind of my go-to nymphing rig. And what it allows you to do is really get very good drag-free drifts going through the strike zone. And you also leverage the sensitivity of the Keiryu rod. I rely a lot on this little, on the tip section of the rod as my indicator. And I also use, a lot of feel and intuition when I'm fishing this rig. And my suggestion is to be aggressive with your strikes. The more that you strike, the more likely you are to get a fish. You will also have a lot of non-successful strikes, but that's the nature of nymphing. And the more you do it, the more you can hone in that intuition and that feel. Now, with that said, you can use indicators. Traditional Euro-style nymphing calls for not using indicators, but I have used indicators many times with this rig and been successful. I would say most of the time I'm not using an indicator. If I'm using something like a thingamabobber or a little foam indicator like this, the benefit is you can cast a little further, and it helps you visibility wise, especially if the water is pretty rough and fast. The downside, of course, is these are going to add drag to your presentation. They're also going to limit your ability to adjust your depth. And I will do that, especially when I'm hitting new water. I go through kind of a little period where I'm adjusting the depth to try to get close to the bottom but not get snagged. And then when I find that zone, you know, I just drift as best as I can through that zone. I often get hit early in a drift when I have the depth right, or at the very end of the drift when that nymph is as far away as possible and I'm just starting to lift up that rod. Oftentimes a trout will hit it very hard. I will mention two other things. One is using cider material. I'm not going to use it in today's rig because I typically don't use it as much anymore. Like I said, I'm using the tip of that rod and I'm using kind of feel and intuition, but cider material works great. Two-tone tippet material like this. You would place about a foot or 2 feet of this above the water and use that as an indicator. And then finally, the other option you can do is to use yard markers like this. Again, you would put them above the water, space them apart so you can see them. So with that said, let's build our Euro style rig. Okay everyone, let's start building our rig. One thing I want to mention before we do in terms of indicators, I forgot to mention that if you're using a floating line, a great indicator to use is just a big beefy dry fly. It works extremely well. It's less spooky to the fish, and you have the added benefit of getting some strikes on it as well. So it's a great option. Okay, in terms of building our rig today, I'm going to be using 4 different lines. We're going to start with a 50-pound braid line, and that is going to be to make the loop that we're going to use for the girth hitch knot. We then have a 15-pound braid, and we're going to use about 4 feet of that, and that's a high visibility line. We then have our main line, which can be anywhere from 4x down to typically 3x. You can also use 6-pound mono, and we have about 9 feet of that. And then our final section is the final tippet section here. We can go anywhere from 7x to 5x or even 4x depending on the situation that you're in, and that's about 4 feet. So a few comments on these lines here. You don't have to use 50-pound braid to make that loop. The reason I recommend it is because 50-pound braid is a lot stiffer than 15-pound braid, and it maintains its shape. So when you're out in the water and you need to get that loop out, it's just a lot easier to manipulate. So I think it's great material to use for that loop. I like the 15-pound braid. It does aid in visibility. And over here, again, you have some options. If you're going to be using 4x, then I would go with 3x. I would always go bigger here because you want to have a bit of a taper effect. For today's build, I'm just going to be using 6-pound line. And then the final section here, I do like to go with fluoro. I think it gives you a little bit of an advantage in terms of stretch and visibility. Certainly there's a lot of discussion about that, but for this final section I usually just use fluoro. So we have 4 feet, 9 feet, and 4 feet. We're looking at about a 17-foot line. Anywhere from 16 to 17 feet is great. The rod is going to be longer than that. So I typically recommend having a line that's a little bit shorter than the rod. It just makes it easier to use. And with our T100, for example, you can just attach that line to the little ring at the end of the handle, and it's very handy. Okay, so let's get started building the rig. Okay, so we're going to start with a 50-pound braid, and we're going to cut off about a 10 to 11 inch piece of braid. We're going to fold it in half. And about 1 inch from the top, we're going to do a simple overhand single loop. And that's going to form the tag end. And then we're going to do another surgeon's loop. This one we're going to pass it through 2 times. Okay, and that is going to be the loop for your girth hitch knot. So we'll go ahead and just cut that tag off. Okay, we'll then take our 15-pound braid. In this case, I'm going to use a much smaller piece. We'll fold over the tip, and we will do a surgeon's loop. So we're going to pass it through 2 times. And then we'll cut the tag end. You can see here how much more difficult a 15-pound braid is to handle. There we go. So now we're going to take our loop with the 50-pound braid, place it over the smaller loop, and just run through it and run the tag end through it. Then we're going to cinch that tightly down, and that is your top of the line. That is your loop for your girth hitch knot, and that's your tag, and that's your line. So it's very easy to do the girth hitch knot. Put the Lillian right there. One thing I like about this is there's no big knot there that gets in the way when you're doing the girth hitch. So it's very simple, very easy. Okay, to this braided line, we're going to attach the 4x line. And again, I'm going to be using a smaller piece. And in this case, because this is braid, we are going to do a surgeon's knot with 4 pass-throughs, not the typical 2. And that'll provide the strength that we need for this connection. So you want to overlap the lines about 5 or 6 inches. Then we will wet the knot, and we'll cinch it down. Then we are left with tag ends. We're going to cut the 4x tag, and we have a little tag of the remaining braid line. Now if you want, you can leave about 1 inch of this tag line visible. That may help you just from a visibility standpoint. Since this part of the line probably won't be going into the water, it's really not going to add any drag, and it might aid in your visibility. I typically don't do it myself, but there's no reason you can't, and I know people who do. So we now have our connection, our braided line to our 4x. So we're now ready to attach our 6x line to the 4x line. And before we do that, we need to think about the tag that we will be adding to the 6x line. We're going to have about 4 feet of 6x line. We're going to have a bottom nymph, and then about 1 foot to 1.5 feet, we're going to have another nymph. And there's 2 ways to attach that. Okay, so now we're going to attach our tag line to the tippet line. And there's 2 ways to do this. One way is, if this is your tippet line, and this is where your fly is going to go, and you want to attach your tag line here, one way to do that is to take about 10 to 12 inches of tag line, place it over the tippet line, and tie a surgeon's knot right here. And you want to use 4 pass-throughs instead of the 2 pass-throughs that you typically would use with a surgeon's knot. The reason to use 4 is that it creates a more perpendicular tag line attachment to the tippet line. It'll look more like this, which is what you want. See if you can see that right there. So let me show you an example of this. Here is the line that I tied with 6x tippet. Hopefully you can see that. and you can see that line comes out like that. It's a very perpendicular, it's a very clean line coming off the tippet line. Okay, the second type of tagline that you can attach is, we'll go back to our tippet line here, where we're going to have the fly right here, and we want to attach a tagline right here. The other option is to tie a simple overhand knot right here and here, then to attach a tagline that has a loop on the end of it, and just to thread the line through that loop and through the tippet line like that. I'll go ahead and show you with this line right here. If this is our tippet line, we'll do a simple overhand knot, and about 1.5 to 2 inches apart above that we'll do another simple overhand knot. So we'll have two knots on this line. We'll then take our tagline and make a simple surgeon's loop at the top, and we'll basically thread our line through the loop and over that tippet line and cinch it tight, and that's our tagline. Now obviously here this loop can move, and that is why you have the simple overhand knots there, to prevent that line from moving too far up or down. The benefit of this type of line is if you have to change a fly and you don't have enough line on this tagline to do that, it's very easy to simply cut this and put a new one on. So this is very flexible, very versatile. You can even bring extra taglines with loops with you and just change them out. Okay guys, now that we've completed our tippet line with our tagline, we will attach that tippet line to our 4X line using a simple surgeon's knot. We'll overlap the two lines a few inches, create a loop, pass that line through that loop 2 times, and once you've done that, you will cinch it, wet it, and then cinch it tightly down. You will then cut the tag ends. Okay, now that we've attached the tippet line to the 4X line, we've completed our entire line. So we have our tippet section here at the bottom with the tag. Then we have the 4X. And then we have our 15-pound braid line, which is high visibility, which is nice. And then we have the loop for the girth hitch knot. So the line is done. The next step is to think about the flies to put on. So I will show you a completed rig that we have here, and this is a 17-foot Euro rig. And typically what we're going to do in these rigs is we're going to go with a heavy fly at the bottom and a much lighter fly at the top. So here we have a hare's ear tungsten weighted fly. This is about a size 10. If the water is deeper, faster, or just bigger water, you're gonna want to go with a bigger fly at the bottom. Then the reverse is true if you're in more shallow or slower water. For the top fly, we typically go with a much smaller 16, 18, or 20 size fly. This is a little TNT jig fly. That's very nice. or you can do a unweighted fly. For example, these are little Euro hare's ear flies, unweighted, and they work great. So in terms of the catch ratio between these two, it's about 50-50, perhaps a slight edge to the bottom fly, maybe 55-45, but obviously it depends on the conditions that you're going to be fishing in, the water that you're in. Now the next question is knots to use. I typically will use a Palomar knot for the bottom fly. It's very easy to tie, especially with the big eyes, hook eyes that the bottom fly has. It's very easy to use the Palomar that you have to thread through that eye 2 times. For the top fly, I will typically use the double Davy knot. One more thing about the Palomar knot, it's the strongest knot that I typically use. The improved clinch knot, double Davy, and the Rapala knot, the Palomar is the strongest. So on the top fly, we'll use the double Davy, and I'll go ahead and show you what that's like because I've had many questions on that. Alright, here we have a little stone fly, big stone fly. And basically for the double Davy is you're just going to thread the line through the eye. You're going to turn that fly over. You're going to form a loop, then pass the tag through that loop, and then around one more time, and through the loop again. That is the Davy knot. If you loop it in one more time, you have the double Davy. So if you take that loop and pass it, take that line, and pass it through the loop one more time, you now have the double Davy. You take that tag, you grab a hold of the line, you wet it, and you start to cinch it. Don't cinch it all the way. Grab the fly, grab the line, and then tighten it really fast. And that line will snap into place, and the tag, and that is the double Davy. So after that you're done, go ahead, take a Sharpie, mark up your line, put the length of the line. When you get to the water, one tip that I have is don't unwind it too fast, because you're excited, you want to get out there, but when you get to the bottom where the flies are, just slow your pace so these flies don't get tangled up, and then you're good to go. These are great rigs for Keiryu lines, and let us know what questions you have, and we'll get back to you. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe so we can do more videos. Thanks.